Hello, everyone, and welcome to Storie Straordinarie. This channel is owned by Filippo Peschiera. I'm Iris Petrone, and today I have the incredible honor of hosting Dr. Pilar Calva. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
It is me who's very thankful to you for the invitation.
On this channel, we have often talked about the life and the work of the French physician and genetist Jérôme Lejeune. For those who may not know, he was the scientist who discovered trisomy 21, the cause of Down syndrome. And you can find more information in the description of this video. We recently learned about Dr. Calva's extraordinary career and the fact that she had the opportunity to work closely with Professor Lejeune in Paris. So that's why we are grateful to have her with us today. So we can start with you telling us maybe about how the opportunity to work with the Professor Lejeune came about, and how did you react when you were first offered with this chance?
Yes, so it was really all, we say, a God incidents. There are no coincidences. I was at the end of my 6-year formation as a medical doctor in Mexico City. I became very interested on genetics. At that time, it was not so common to have genetics on a medical school. It was the beginning of the 80s. Usually you would have between 2 or 3 classes in the embryology class about genetics, but my university was very pioneer because we did have a whole semester on genetics. So since I knew genetics, I fell in love with genetics, and I knew I wanted to specialize on genetics. So I was always very close to my professor on genetics in Mexico. He was a very good scientist, but as most scientists, he was more or less very scientificist, more liberal. And I would go, I remember, all summers to work with him. And but he always told me that first I had to be a good doctor, medical doctor, before specializing on clinical genetics. Then I was almost to be done in my school. I had to work on my thesis work to have my degree. My dad always admired the French medical school. I even studied in some of his books. He was also a medical doctor. And at the end, also my eldest brother, who had studied medicine, was at that time in Paris, studying his second specialization in Paris. And so my dad offered, why did I go to do my thesis work in Paris? Because my brother was living there. At that time, we had no Google bar, so it was really difficult to know who was on the other side of the sea working on a field I was interested, and it was not so common that a medical doctor would be interested in that. It was mainly researchers who did genetics. So I asked my professor in Mexico what I was interested on, and very fastly he told me, I know that the best scientist and medical doctor in genetics lives in Paris. We're going to write to him because I have met him in several genetics congresses, and no doubt he's the first. So he was the one who first told me that he had opened a completely new field in medicine that was genetics to be applied as explaining some diseases that would have a genetical origin, and that the first, of course, was the cause of Down syndrome. John London Down, decades before, had described how these children were, how their eyes were, their head, the cardiopathy they were have, their hypotony. But John London Down didn't know what caused this. He even thought it was maybe a venereal disease, syphilis. And up to then, these little patients were very much discriminated. They were uglily called the Mongoloids. And my dad refers that when they were born in his little town, they would tie them to the legs of a bed and never let them go out because it was a dishonor in the family. So having Lejeune in 1959 described that the origin was not unknown, was not a venereal disease, but was an extra chromosome, number 21, what he called trisomy 21. We'll have a pair of chromosomes. We have 23 pairs of chromosomes, 46 in total, and they do have a trisomy 21. They have 3 chromosomes 21, and that's what they make them be very special. So we started letters going on and forth. Finally, I was accepted by Kim to do my thesis work. And that is how I went to Paris to work with him on my thesis. What was my first impression when I got to his lab? I got to his lab and I still remember his face. He had some extraordinary clear blue eyes. And at that time, I said, he's not only a very intelligent man, he's a wise man. And later, what I defined as a wise man was that he was able to give the academically highest scientific dissertation. And at the same time, all the truths he would defend, he could put them in a very simple language so that everybody could understand them. Sometimes he would go to my microscope. It was one of those microscopes where you have 2 pairs of lenses. And he would say, let me show this little boy why he's so special. And they would sit for several minutes until they could identify the 3 chromosomes 21. And at that time, this little boy would say, oh, now I know why I'm so special. So for me, that was a wise man. So I knew from the first time I saw him that undoubtedly I would learn a lot about him. But at that time, I thought I would learn a lot about science. But I knew much more with the time about ethics.
Do you remember any special moment or story that maybe you want to share with us about your time working with him? And also if you had the opportunity to get to know his family.
Yes, we had many stories that I could tell you. The first one is that was very blessed. I have never liked labs nor desks. I like consultation rooms. I do like clinics. And he gave me as a thesis work a lab thing. And I don't know if I made a face or what, because I didn't like very much my thesis work, but that's why he asked me to do. But then he said in me, I said, oh, you work in your lab project, that's your thesis, when I'm not in the consultation room. While I'm in the consultation room, you are like my shadow. So I spent this first time 8 months, hours and hours next to him while he went through maybe 1,000 patients, at least hundreds of patients, their parents. And I would look at him and say, what does he have of special that he really sees the patient, he really gives a treatment, because that was what moved him a lot to get to discover what was the cause. We doctors know that if you get to the cause of the disease, then you'll be able to go to the cure. If you don't know the cause, it's very difficult to go to the cure. So he was so happy to know which was the cause. It was not a simple cure, because up to now, we cannot do things on the chromosomes. A surgery would have to go to the nucleus of all our trillions of cells and take out the extra 21. We'd have to go and block chemically the products of this extra one. But he always was worried of giving something pharmaceutically that would block the extra products that this chromosome was making. And his discovery was misused because of the freedom that a scientist has. And he recognized it when once I was there, a young boy arrived to the consultation room. He went to Lejeune, embraced him, and said, "Professor, tell us that you are going to defend us. They want to kill us." Professor Lejeune didn't know what to think. I said, "Well, explain me more." And he said, "Because I saw on TV that thanks to your discovery, now they can look and diagnose trisomy 21 since you're a baby in uterus," that's prenatal diagnosis. And then the proposal is to go to a selective abortion, a genetic abortion, to eliminate those patients who are sick. So at that time, he gave me one of several ethical lessons. He told me, "Pilar, medical field is to end with diseases, not to end with sick people. To end the life of a sick people, because you cannot end with a disease, because you still have to work a lot on discovering good things to work on, is a cowardice." For example, if for the lepra, if they had killed all the lepra, these sick people, there would have never been someone who had arrived with a treatment for lepra. Lepra is completely treated. So that was, for example, one of the things. Another thing I saw in the consultation room is that sometimes there would be some parents that would arrive without no baby, no child who was sick. I started to understand that they had just been parents and the baby was left at the hospital, because at that time, abortion was not only legal in France, but was paid by the Social Security. But if this screening done, prenatal diagnosis, before they were born, passed someone who was born with a trisomy 21, they had the chance to know if their baby was affected with trisomy 21 or not. And they had 3 days to recognize the baby as their child or completely abandon him at the hospital. So they were coming for the result. And I could see how Lejeune said the truth. He explained that the baby, of course, had trisomy 21. But then he made the parents come in love with their child, explaining that their child is to be loved, not to be killed. So I could see how he would convince these parents who are in this mood of we're abandoning our child or we're killing our child, and they would keep him, and sometimes these babies, because of cardiopathy or other things, they would die, and they would then adopt a baby from someone else who was abandoned in the hospital. So he really was very coherent between what he told, what he defended in big arenas like congresses. When he was given awards, he was always defending the life since conception until natural death. And he did it also in his patients. He was very, very coherent. Another story I remember is I always saw he had a very simple lab. I said, oh, he's a great scientist, but he has a very simple lab. And then I knew he was asked to do prenatal diagnosis, because if he was the one to study the chromosomes, not only from the babies that were born or the parents, but that he should study also the samples of those babies who they would take the sample before being born in prenatal diagnosis. But he already opposed, because he told me collaborating with evil is already evil. We say in Spanish, tanto peca el que mata la vaca como el que agarra la pata. In English would be, it's evil the person who directly kills the cow as the person who takes the paw of the cow so the cow doesn't run and the other kills the cow. One is an indirect collaboration, the other one is a direct collaboration. So he would tell me, if I do prenatal diagnosis here and I write the result, and the result is a trisomy 21 or trisomy 18 or whatever, maybe in another continent, with this paper, they will apply a penalty sentence to this baby. So I'm collaborating with killing, and I cannot collaborate with killing. So he always, for example, coherently opposed to do prenatal diagnosis, and that's why the funding of his lab was always very, very much shortened. But even though he did a lot of research papers, clinical work, lab work, and he started one of the most important molecular biology work on research. So he was a great scientist, a great clinical, and he always did his clinical work and his lab work based on the truth.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I just want to ask you some question about you and your work now. I read some articles, and I know you came from an environment where abortion and contraception were considered acceptable. And so my question is, when did you start seeing things differently? Was it a slow change, or was there a turning point?
Okay, yes, the turning point was my first stage with Dr. Lejeune. I then came back to do another 2 years. I already had a specialization in genetics in Mexico, and I went to do cytogenetics. But of course, when I arrived there, they had suggested in my university And I was kind of liberal, and I had my friends who were liberal. I had contact or mostly contact with liberal professors. So I was very well taken by the culture of death. The culture of death starts with contraception. So I was asked to give contraception on the poor towns in Mexico where I saw poverty, and I was convinced that poorness would be ended when you disappeared the poor, when you didn't let them um, be invited to life through contraception. Once you accept contraception, I even imposed contraception, mainly the shot, the Depo-Provera, which is nonsense because it's the only product in pharmacology that makes something that is well working, and it's a hormonal axis that is very, very complex, that comes from the brain until the ovary, passing through the hypothalamus and the hypophysis, and it is damaged. But once you accept contraception, then you accept abortion, because abortion is the result of contraception. When contraception is not used, when contraception doesn't work, then the solution is abortion. I was in favor of abortion. I never did an abortion, but it was the beginning of the 80s. My professor in genetics had everything ready to do prenatal diagnosis, but he was waiting that the old-fashioned deputies would liberate the abortion in case of a genetic disease. I never did one because it was not very easy to do one, but maybe I would have not opposed. Then I was in favor of the artificial techniques, then in favor of euthanasia. That's the way I arrived with Lejeune. He never made a test on what were my values, my universal values, my ethical values. He only preached me by his example. And the turning point was seeing a man who knew so much about the disease, who knew that the solution was not easy, was maybe not immediate, that some patients, as anything else, react well to the treatment, but other patients do not very good, and they suffer, and the family suffers. But then I saw him give this sense to suffering, and always tell me, science serves the person, not the way around. Not the science serves a person serves the science. You can never use a person in the name of science. To the research, you can never use a person by killing. Okay? And then there was a third aspect. He made some mysterious trips to Rome, to the Vatican. At that time, I was not, I didn't practice Catholicism, so I knew nothing about Rome. I knew nothing about the Vatican. I knew nothing about the Holy Father. And he would only tell me that he would go to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, that I should work on my lab work because we wouldn't have the academic sessions on Friday and Saturday. And Monday, I would receive the paper he had presented at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. First paper was on nuclear disarmament, taking out the nuclear weapons. Was interesting, but okay. But the second paper was called Biology, Science, and Faith. It was much more before Fide Serratio was written, Faith and Reason. But that was what made me click when I could have all these things that were completely disarranged. what had more value, scientific data, your faith, your values, the intrinsic value of the person. And so at that time when I read, I started to see much more what he really did in his practice, and that helped. 8 months after I arrived, I had to come back to Mexico. And in simple words, I told him, when I arrived here, I thought one puts the white blouse to be a clinical doctor and takes off the cross. On Sunday, one puts the cross, takes off the white blouse. Because one thing is a science, another thing is your faith. And you have taught me by your example, mainly, that one should have at the same time the white blouse and the cross, or to say, medical science and ethical science, because ethics is a rational science, are completely compatible in what a doctor does. Then I said I was kind of scared to come back to what I did in Mexico, and he promised two things that he did until the end. One, he advised whom should I look for, a group of priests, and the other, he said, I will send you everything I write, and he sent me everything until his last page. So yes, I have a lot of his writings. Some of his writings are handwritten, and it was a real privilege. And what he struck me a lot also was his humbleness. He was a very humble man. He received one of the best prizes. He lost the Nobel Prize for being defending the truth, but he was so humble that really struck me.
Wow. You also spoken publicly and in legal settings about the value of human life. What has it been like to present scientific truth about life in a world that often seems to reject it?
Mainly, I lost much of the time in my life doing lobbying. I even did international lobbying in UN. I would do lobbying in my country, in deputies, senate, congressmen. And everything is like already cooked. They do know their agenda. And it's a giant compared to what you can do. But then I knew what we have to do is to form the conscience of people. It's important to form medical doctors on these ethical medical aspects, but it's also so important to form the users of medical things, because the doctor will say, I propose this, do you agree or not? So I said, legal things maybe will not change as a legal thing. But when you can tell that what is legal many times is not good ethically, can help someone not use an unethical law. I remember some months ago that very sadly, euthanasia was passed in one of our Latino countries, in Ecuador. The law is terrible, but cultural life always says in abortion, in euthanasia. Well, we have it so that someone who wants to use it can do it. But we never force someone to do it. So then I started speaking. This can be legal, but it is not good. And most of our Latino countries, mainly simple people who can get the truth very fastly, know that they do not want to do anything that is an offense to God, because they want to get to heaven. They have it very clearly. As long as someone goes upper in academics, maybe it's more difficult to tell it. So when I present in legal issues, or it's before the votation of a law, it can still help, because maybe someone turns his vote, or at least he will not be able to say, I didn't know, I just raised my hand. He did evil or he did good. And after a law is under votation, be able to tell them it can be legal, but it's not good, and you do not have to use this law. And I always try to present good alternatives when you do not use this law. So when you do not apply euthanasia, for example, you can care of a patient when you cannot cure. And then if they are going to kill by starving to death, I tell people why obviously they have to always give food to a patient, because any living thing that is not fed, you will kill them of starving, not of cancer or whatever. So what I try to do is, maybe there will be no legal recognition, but try to get into the conscience of people who will use the laws.
Yeah, and it's very connected with my last question, which is, as a teacher and physician, of course, and communicator, what is your contribution today to helping students and everyday people to form an informed opinion about the value of life?
Okay, the first is I have to be thankful to Lejeune. Why did I get to Lejeune? I was not the more ethical, I was not the more with principles. Why between all my classmates did I get there and get my conversion? So I want to be very thankful. It's a way like to honor Lejeune. I cannot have learned something that then I do not share. So that is the first thing why I try to do this. The second thing is I have always loved to teach, even before the medical school. But I started teaching genetics very young in my medical school. And teaching keeps me always very actualized on scientific data. And at the same time, makes me having these pedagogic tools to make my students understand something that maybe is theory. But at the same time, having my patients, I started with other friends and apostolic work. That was an interactive web in 2000, where we had the first virtual consultation rooms, much more before COVID, and online courses where we would make. So I've had experience of having, in some subjects, millions of consultations around the world, because for bioethics, I do not have to be with the patient. Whatever I ask, it's enough to help them explain the things so they can take decisions. So how do I get from the classroom? I get the last knowledge to put it on the service of those who have to take decisions, the patient, the family, okay? And at the same time, those patients give me the cases for my classes. So most people like my classes because they, oh, you're empathic. Wow, good cases. Where do you bring them from? From a book? I said, no. Every case, I know the first name or the last name. Of course, I don't say it because they have to be anonymous. So that helps me work like both fields. And it's also being thankful to Lejeune because he helped me know that when someone knows a lot, but not enough of something, he will never be able to simplify. he'll use very complex words. And when someone knows a lot of something, even the more complex, you can make it simple. That's what has happened.
Thank you so much for your time, for being here with us today. So it has been an honor, and we really appreciate your time. So keep doing what you're doing, and thank you so much.
You're welcome.